In my last video, I told you that I was going to talk about my flight from Hong Kong to Beijing on Dragon Air. I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk about what you can do in Hong Kong if you have a short layover. I'll also talk about my flight from Shanghai to Hong Kong and Hong Kong to Taipei on Hong Kong Airlines, which is a different airlines than Cathay and Dragon Air. I took the train into Hong Kong, and it was very easy because the train leaves from the airport and goes right into Hong Kong Island. So there's kind of two options for activities to do that I want to talk about. The first is if you're feeling tired from the long flight and you want to take it easy. And then later in the video, I talk about some hiking activities that you can do in Hong Kong. So on the flight from Boston to Hong Kong, I decided to take it easy, and I just started walking around the area. And I came across the Maritime Museum. I recommend the Maritime Museum because inside it's nice and cool, so you can get out of the really humid, hot Hong Kong air, and also learn a little bit about the maritime history of Hong Kong. After the Maritime Museum, I took a walk along the water, and it's really pretty to see all the buildings in Hong Kong, and it's kind of the typical Hong Kong scene where you can see all the buildings from the water, and I recommend that. After those activities, it was time for lunch. The place I recommend for lunch is one Michelin star restaurant. It's probably the most inexpensive Michelin star restaurant in the world, and it has delicious dim sum. And the name of that restaurant is called Time Ho Wan. So I wanted to try a little bit of everything at Time Ho Wan. And instead of trying a little bit of everything, I pretty much ate all of every dish that I got. It's probably a little bit too much for one person, but I was really excited to try the food that I was eating. So as you know from the previous video, one of my favorite dim sums is sticky rice, so of course I ordered that. The chicken feet were some of the largest chicken feet I've ever seen at a dim sum restaurant. So it was good that they only had about 4 or 5 of those. The char siu bao, the roast pork buns, they were out of this world. I've never had a roast pork bun like this. Inside was juicy with plenty of meat, and then the bread tasted like it was fried, even though it was roasted. And I think it tasted that way because it had so much butter or lard or something in it to make it taste so good. So this place is highly recommended, and I recommend that you try it. After a few hours of exploring, I was ready to go back to the airport and check out the first class lounge. I noticed that it wasn't in its own space, so the air was a little bit warm and humid, but it was a lot better than the air from walking outside in Hong Kong all day, so it wasn't much of a problem. In the first class lounge, there's a self-serve champagne bar, and then there's also a full bar with a bartender and a restaurant. But what I wanted most when I went into the lounge was a shower. I hadn't showered on the flight the day before, and also all day walking around in the warm Hong Kong air. I went into the area where you could take a shower, and I asked the woman who didn't speak English if I could take a shower. And so she brought me to a shower room. So I was a little bit confused because I've heard about the cabanas at the airport, but I wanted to shower bad enough that I wasn't going to complain. So the shower room is pretty spacious and has a toilet, and I think the major feature is that the shower head is about 12 feet overhead and is supposed to simulate rainfall, so it was very relaxing. After a while, I decided I wanted to try to figure out if there was a cabana there, because I at least wanted to take a look even though I wasn't going to use it. And so I brought a picture of the cabana to the worker at the shower, and then of course when she looked at the picture she said cabana, even though she didn't speak any other English. She was nice enough to take me around, and so I took a look at the cabana, and there's a bathtub in there and also a nice couch. Next, I'm going to talk about the actual Dragon Air flight. It's definitely different than a domestic flight in the United States, even though this was of a comparable length, 3 hours from Hong Kong to Beijing. I'm not actually sure whether it qualifies as an international flight or not, since Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China. The first thing I noticed that was different than an American flight is that I got a pre-flight appetizer along with the drink. Even on some American airlines, I noticed that you don't get pre-flight drinks. The other thing I noticed in this flight was that I had my own private little space that was lie flat, and it was really great to have a lie flat seat on this flight since I was so tired and a little bit jet lagged. That really helped out a lot so that I could take a nap on my way to Beijing. The flight attendants were very friendly, as usual, and multilingual, so some of the flight attendants were speaking Cantonese to me, some of them were speaking Mandarin, and some of them were speaking English. So I definitely got the kind of multilingual effect there going on. So I think what I would say that summarizes an American airline versus an Asian airline the best is an anecdote that I heard from someone the other day, which is that in economy class, he was taking a nap and he was in an aisle seat. He was in the aisle a little bit, his head might have been in the aisle. So on an American Airlines, the flight attendants will come crashing through with their cart and hit the person. But on a Chinese Airlines, the flight attendant will say, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Can you move? Can you move, please?" And so it's just a different mentality. And I think that's really what best describes the difference in the flight. I started my trip in China at Beijing. From Beijing, I took a train to Huangshan, which is Yellow Mountain, and then from Huangshan to Shanghai. It was another train. Shanghai to Hong Kong, I took Hong Kong Airlines. I decided to take a different airlines besides Dragon Air for two reasons. The first is that I really wanted to try another Asian airline so that I could compare against Dragon Air. The second reason was that the flight was a little bit more inexpensive. I went to the lounge for Hong Kong Airlines, and I wasn't really sure whether to choose business class or first class because technically my flight was business class, but the flight only had two cabins. So in the US on some airlines, that means that you're in first class. I decided to go to the first class section and no one called me out on it. And I got to check out some of the food in the first class section. I think the noodles were really popular because when I got up to take some video of the noodles, there were no more. The other interesting feature about this lounge was that in the bathroom there was a bidet. And that's definitely something that you see a lot more of in Asia than in the US. The flight itself was very nice. The business class seats are almost fully lie down flat, I think to about an 80-degree angle. The 80-degree angle felt a little bit strange, but it's definitely a lot better than not being able to form into a bed at all. The other thing that was provided was slippers. The significance of slippers in Asian culture I can describe by an example. In my current apartment, the landlord won't allow me to wear shoes into the apartment, and so I have to keep my shoes outside. And so the thing that most people do inside is wear slippers. And so slippers are pretty significant. I had a 12-hour layover in Hong Kong on my flight from Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taipei. I scheduled the 12-hour layover deliberately because I wanted to explore Hong Kong a little bit more. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do when I got off the plane, but I found a guidebook that had some really great hikes in it. The one I chose was an 8-mile hike from right next to the airport to a fishing village called Tai O. You can take a bus from the airport right to the starting point. The hike itself isn't that difficult as far as the path is concerned, but the heat and the humidity do make it a little bit more difficult. I recommend bringing some water because there's not many places to stop for water along the way. It's really nice to be able to see some different scenery in Hong Kong than just the buildings of Hong Kong. The hike had a lot of mountainous terrain and was also right across the water from the airport, so I could see some planes taking off and landing. When I got to my destination of the fishing village Tai O, I decided to take the bus back to the airport because I was really tired and I didn't think I could hike another 8 miles back or have enough time to do it. And finally, it was time to take the flight from Hong Kong to Taipei, the last leg of this journey. There's not too much to say about the flight itself, but I will note that I ended up knocking over my pre-flight drink when I was looking for a pen to fill out my immigration forms. The flight attendants were super nice about this, even though I was really embarrassed. They allowed me to change seats because there were some extra seats. So the excuse that I give of why I ended up knocking the drink over is because they're really way too efficient on Asian airlines. They handed out the immigration forms and the pre-flight drink. And on an American airline, what would happen is that I wouldn't have even had the pre-flight drink yet. So if I was searching for my pen, I wouldn't have even had a chance to knock over the drink. And so that concludes the journey all the way from Boston to Taiwan.